Welcome back, and thanks for joining us. Last week, Steve got the mast blocking fit into place, so that'll get bolted in today along with the half beams that will also get attached here. Some additional blocking will go in around this to make this point as strong as it can possibly be. And then these long carlins will go in. These will later meet up with the housetop. And then we'll get to see how the diesel fits into place.
Look at a lot better. Thank you. Pretty happy. You know, lining up on this side is pretty easy. Eyeballing through 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 inches of timber. And I came out pretty much right where I wanted to be. This one ended up dropping a little bit and this one climbed a little bit, but I mean, 1/8 of an inch, quarter at most. Not too shabby, almost like I knew what I was doing. So now I'm going to go and sand this face because you're going to see this in the boat. And I'm going to seal the edges here and seal here and get this painted up. And I'm going to make the bolts that go through here and I'll get this installed. And then these two deck beams will just be one big piece. And when we take them out to do the final sanding and varnishing and stuff, we'll leave this all bolted in the middle here and it'll just come out as one big unit and we can work on it. We don't have far to take it. We could even just spin it and do the varnishing in the boat if we really had to. While I wait for the paint to dry on that mast blocking and on the deck beams, I'm going to start working on finding and making the short beams or half beams that are going to go from the shelf and meet up in the middle of that blocking. So I got the pattern right here, and this is L. And if this is center, we get to come back to, I don't know, somewhere in here for the end of the blocking. And then this is long, so the end of the shelf will be in here. So it's not a terribly big piece that we need to find. So I'm gonna look in the offcuts here from the main deck beams, see if I can find it there before I go pull tarps and look through the piles out there. Pretty sure it'll be in here somewhere. There's some decent hunks. You look pretty good though. So I got it marked out here, and I have a mark on the ends that this one's 6 inches and the other one is 10 inches from the center. The distance doesn't really matter, but what does matter is I just need to know where I need to cut when I put the joint in, where it meets the center blocking. Because these deck beams aren't the same arc all the way across, I can't just take any part of that pattern and use it to make this little piece. I gotta make sure that I use the right piece of that pattern for the right piece of this so that everything lines up well. And knowing where that center mark is behooves me, because I can measure out how far I need from center and then just extrapolate that from there and cut it off. So I'm gonna slice these out now. Should we go bolt that block in? And then I think it's lunchtime. Actually, I think it's past lunchtime, but I want to get that block in first. Oh, it's so satisfying. it's time for some lunch, and I've got the half beams ready to go in. So I'll cut the mortises and stuff for those, get those figured out. And then the last thing is once those go in, I'm gonna fit just a little more blocking in here and probably put in a couple more big bolts and lock all that together. So I wanna make sure that the mast is very well supported. And being a gaff rig, there will be the support here at the deck, and then there will be the support at the very top of the mast, nothing in the middle. So this will definitely carry some pretty solid loads. And I want to make sure that this gets extended and transferred well into the beams and blocked up really well. And since the grain runs port to starboard and the bolts run fore and aft, this piece should be pretty strong. If it did split for some reason, the bolts would keep it from going anywhere. And same thing once the blocking goes in here, I think we'll be in great shape. Pretty good. How do we do over here? Even better. All right. Yesterday, I finished putting the blocking in here for the mast, so I finished fitting the knees and got them sanded and sealed and drilled for all the fasteners. And drilling through all of this is a bit of a trick, but that's all done. The only thing left to do is to put a bolt here and a bolt here. I just couldn't put those in because of the deck beam forward of them, but all this assembly has to come out and get sanded and its final coats of varnish put on it so we can pop those bolts in then, no biggie. The next order of business is to tackle the house carlins. So the carlins, they're gonna run fore and aft here, and they're gonna define the sides of the house. Thad and I worked on kind of a location for that. Satchel and I refined it a little bit farther. So I have all of that marked out. And I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have a string that's run. And we can go take a little closer look at that. The string that I have here is defining the house side. And as you can see, the string is about an inch, inch and a quarter higher than that deck beam pattern at frame S there, which is about midship. And the reason that's not touching is because we have a sweep to the shear, right? The stem and the stern are higher than midship. And we want this deck beam that's going to go in to follow that shear. If we were to make it straight, we would end up with a hump in the side deck when we put all of the short beams in and the rest of the decking on it. And this beam is 2 inches wide by 2.5 deep, just like the rest deck beams. It's not doubled up. And the reason for that is it runs this whole way, and that would be incredibly weak, except the house gets bolted to it, which is a very tall, very rigid timber. So right now, it's gonna, define the house sides here, and it's gonna connect the house sides very strongly to our shelf. But what's gonna keep this from bouncing up and down over time is gonna be the rigidity that that house provides for it. So I could cut this out of an arc, but I think what I'm gonna do is this is such a short little drop to it, and this is such a long run that I think I'm just gonna make a 2 inch by 2.5 inch deck beam, and I'll cut it a little bit longer than I need to be to account for that dip, and we'll put a post there for now. I think I'm just gonna edge set that deck beam down a little bit, and we can put a bracing in there. I'm planning on a knee going exactly where that deck beam pattern is. So once that knee goes in, that would lock it down anyways. Same thing once the rest of the Carlins and the house and stuff go in. And that'll give it a really nice sweep. And that's gonna it's gonna wanna spring up a little bit, which I think is gonna build in just a little bit of rigidity to the deck. If this was 2 or 3 inches, I would definitely be sawing it out of a sweep. I wouldn't be trying to get it straight. But that's such a short distance that I really don't think it's going to take a heck of a lot of force to pull it down. And I can cut the deck beam for that, and I can put it in place. And if I find out that it really doesn't want to edge set, and it doesn't want to do that, I can cut it up, and I can use it for the Carlins, no problem, because those are so short that they're pretty much straight. And I can go cut out a sweep. But I really think I'll be able to edge set that without a whole heck of a lot of force. I mean, this is a full 14-foot run, and if I do it out of a straight stock, I think that'll work. So let's go take a look at some stock. So here's a chunk of locust that Grandpa helped me with this morning. I pulled it out of the pile, and he helped me wrestle it through the thickness planer, and I got it cleaned up enough that I can see what I'm working with. I'm going to cut it down to size here. Now, we haven't talked about it much, but the reason we're using black locust for the deck structure is mainly because it's incredibly rot resistant. It's been referred to as New England teak. If you talk to old farmers and ask them how long it'll last as a fence post, they'll tell you like 2 years longer than stone or something along those lines. It's really, really great for that. It's fantastic boat wood. It's more rot resistant than oak. It's harder than oak. It likes to grow twisted and weird shapes, and it doesn't like to split easily. It's really, really great wood. And one of the reasons it doesn't get used more often is that it grows really crazily. So it's a first succession species usually, and it's a nitrogen fixer. So it'll go in areas that are like depleted farm soil, sand dunes, that kind of thing, along like gravelly riverbanks. And they grow pretty fast, but they grow and they just like arc and twist and bend. And the other thing is, as they grow out, they grow in this kind of like almost clover leaf shape where they end up wrapping in around themselves, and you get all of this included bark, and that included bark eventually rots. And if it doesn't rot, carpenter ants love to hollow it out, and they make homes in there, and then eventually they burrow into the good wood, and that starts to finally get it to rot. So they're not terribly long-lived trees. They don't have great like heavy-duty root systems. So for commercial lumber, they're just not ideal. It's really hard to find big clear chunks of locust. And I mean, we can see this is big and wide and beautiful, but if we flip it over, it's a little different on the other side. So as you can see, it's not so pretty looking on this side. And this is where I was talking about we get those clover leaves. So this was a really big, really straight locust, but we have all of these big inclusions, and these will eventually, like I said, they'll lead to rot, they'll lead to carpenter ants, but they make it so that you have these big trees and you cut them into flitches and you don't end up with really big, wide, clear boards. That's really, really rare in locusts. So what you end up with is
a lot of this stuff we've been working with. Crazy sweeps, big chunks of included bark and damage, all sorts of crazy grain patterns. The other thing with locust is when it dries, it really likes to warp, it likes to twist, it likes to check, it likes to cup. So that's the reason we stacked all of the locusts underneath all of the cedar. I wanted to put a couple 1,000 pounds on top of all the locusts and try to keep it flat and keep it from moving too much as it dried, and keeping it low in the pile and closer to the ground hopefully would allow it to dry more slowly. And so far it seems to have worked. It feels really dry, and the stuff we put in the boat so far has proven to be stable. Hopefully it stays that way. So I'm going to rip this thing down the middle and run it through the thickness planer a few more times, but I think we've got one house carlin on one side and one house carlin on the other, which is kind of amazing that I think that's all we're going to really get out of this big old timber, but it's kind of how locust goes. The rest will become firewood and keep me warm this winter. I'm getting this lined up where I want it. I've got a mark here on the deck beams, which is the outside face of where this carlin's gonna land. These carlins are super long right now, and I'm just kind of sliding them back and forth. I got a couple little knots here, which honestly are small enough that I'm not really even worried about them, but I think I can dodge them, so why not dodge them? So yeah, I'm just kind of playing with it a little bit here, and then I'm gonna put that deck beam pattern back in place and use that to clamp this down a little bit. And I think putting the spring in it is gonna not be any difficulty at all. So, looking good. Looks pretty good. So this morning I'm working on fitting the house carlins. So we have the house carlin here that's running fore and aft, and we have our deck beam here, and we have the template. So this is the pattern that I've been using for the joint. So that'll get cut like that, and it'll have a corresponding recess mortised into the beam here, and then that little shelf will sit and make sure it doesn't ever want to drop lower. Now there's some funkiness going on here. This board, this carlin, is going to drop vertically down until the bottom of the carlin is flush with the bottom of the deck beam. But these deck beams are not plumb. So about there would be plumb. So I need to account for that discrepancy between plumb for this distance to here onto here. Because if I were to cut the carlin joint like that, and then it were to drop down vertically, the very end here would be shy of the deck beam. Now if the deck beam was scribed to fit the shelf and stood vertically, it wouldn't be an issue. You could just butt this right up against it, scribe it, and go to town. The reason we didn't scribe the deck beams to match the shelf is that this angle is really, really slight. And it's almost nothing for most of midship, and it's the most severe in the stem and stern. And the only thing that this angle is really going to affect is when we will go to put bulkheads and that kind of thing against it. But it's such a minor difference that we can just plane in the top of the bulkhead a little bit and have it fit right up against it. And it's not on midship where we're going to be doing the most of that kind of thing. It's almost purely plumb, so it's not going to be an issue. In the stem and the stern, where it's the most severe, we're not going to be putting in bulkheads and that kind of thing, so it's a moot point. So it's following Thad's advice here. He was the one that suggested we not scribe in the bottoms, and those are his reasons why, and I think he's right. We'll find out as we proceed. So my order of operation here, because I only have two hands, is to get that clamped and get it plumb. Okay, so we're clamped nice and tight to the carlin. We're touching right here at the top corner of the deck beam, and we're floating on this bottom side. And that's 3/16. So we're going to add 3/16 to the bottom edge of the deck carlin when we put the pattern on. So that would be 3/16. And then instead of putting the pattern here, we're going to put the pattern on that mark. And keep the bottom edge flush with the deck beam, or with the carlin rather, and then just trace this out. So I did this on all of them. This was the last one. And we're up forward, so we're in the stem right now. And this is the most severe that it is. In the stern, it's even less. I think in the stern it was only a 16th. You wanna go outside? Or you wanna stay? Yeah, you tired of the boathouse? Wanna go out to your pen? Oh, poor Akiva. Life is hard, huh? Yeah, no one understands. As you can see, I've been cruising on the deck structure. Man, what a refreshing change of pace it's been to work with timbers that I can pick up and spin around and move myself, and relatively simple joints, somewhat repetitive tasks. It's been a really nice change of pace. It's just gone so much faster and easier. It's such simpler work than planking. As you can see, all the main deck framing is sorted. So all of the hatches and everything are all framed out. All of this deck framing has to come out. It's got to get sanded. It's got to get varnished. It'll get put back into the boat. But for now, it let me get everything fit, and we'll be able to take out most of this in one shot and just do all the finishing, put it in, take out the last little bit, do the finishing. And we'll do that with Alix, who I actually saw last night. He and Kira were here. We had the first dinner inside Arabella, which was really nice. And we got caught up. Sounds like they had a really amazing trip and had a lot of fun. They were blown away by how different the boat is. I mean, when Alix left, there were still molds inside. So that was really cool. And he's really anxious to get back to work. But the goal today is Casey should be here. I actually think I just heard him pull in. And we're going to drop the Diesel in, which should be pretty cool. It's going to be a little bit of a rigging challenge. We're going to take it real slow and make sure we don't mess anything up and send a Diesel crashing through the deck structure that I just built. But behind me, you can see I've got a 4x4 with some webbing spread out on it, and we're going to hang that from the rafters and the cable that's up there, and then hang the Diesel off of that and drop it in the hole where the cockpit is, and make sure that the Diesel will fit in and out of where the cockpit's going to be, and set it down on the engine beds. This won't be the permanent install for the Diesel because it's going to really be in the way when we finish up the last of the oak planks, but I want to see where it lands so we can start figuring out bulkheads and fabricating the cockpit and the depth of that. And all of that, I think will just, I'll rest easier having the Diesel sitting on the engine beds and being able to actually visualize where it really is going to end up being. And then when we go to finish up the last bit of planking, we'll probably just hoist it back out the same way we put it in, and we'll set it on deck, finish up the last bit of planking, and then do the permanent install on it. But today we're just going to drop it in there and see what it looks like and get an idea of how everything fits. Inches of clearance. All right, I'm real happy with here. If you look good on your,
it looks really good here.
So what do you guys got going on down there?
Well, Grant put this in, didn't have all the length, but yeah, on center, hits dead into the drive shaft. The engine's a little off center, but it's about a ½ inch, which is a better way to move it this direction. But in this direction, it's dead on. Someone did some math.
It's almost like we planned it that way.
Just about, I would say. Just
I told you I
about.
figured it right for you, Steve.
Yeah.
You did a great job.